Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Two Girls in the Dark, a true crime podcast about all things strange and spooky. I'm your co-host, Pooja.
And I'm your other co-host, Rachel. Today we're going to be going over the disappearance of the Sodder children. This happened back on Christmas Eve in 1945. And just a little bit of a warning, this one is a little sad.
I got a little emotional, honestly, reading this one.
I got chills down my spine at a couple points.
Yeah, but I think it warrants, a really good discussion, and I can't wait to talk about it with you. So let's get into it. Christmas Eve, 1945. The Sodders, an Italian-American family living in Fayetteville, West Virginia, are wrapping up the night from a day of celebrating the holiday together. George and Jennie Sodder have 10 children. All but one of them are in the house that night. The oldest daughter, Marion, surprised her 3 younger sisters with new toys, and the 5 younger children were so excited that they wanted to stay up past bedtime. Jennie agreed, as long as their chores would be done for the night. And so Maurice, 14, Martha, 12, Louis, 10, Jennie, 8, and Betty, who was 5, all went up to the attic to play. This would be the last time George and Jennie saw them. In a few hours, the house would be up in flames. To this day, no one knows if it was because of an unfortunate accident or something sinister.
At around 12:30 a.m., the telephone rang. Jennie went downstairs to answer. She didn't recognize the voice of the woman on the other end of the line. The woman asked for the name of someone Jennie didn't know. In the back, she could hear laughter and clinking glasses, perhaps celebrating Christmas Eve. Jennie told the woman that she must have the wrong number, went back to bed, noting the woman's weird laugh. During this time, Jennie also noticed that the lights were still on and the curtains weren't drawn yet, which the children normally took care of whenever they stayed up later than her and her husband. Marion had fallen asleep on the living room sofa, so Jennie assumed that the kids who stayed up playing had fallen asleep in the attic. She decided to take care of the lights and curtains and retired to bed. A half an hour later, Jennie was awoken again, this time by the sound of an object hitting the roof, making a loud bang, followed by a rolling noise. She listened for a minute but didn't hear anything else, so she went back to sleep. A half an hour later, Jennie woke up again smelling smoke. She jumped up, seeing that the room her husband used for his office was on fire, around the telephone line and fuse box. She shook her husband, and George woke up their 2 oldest sons, John and George Jr. They all screamed for the children upstairs, but didn't receive anything in response. They couldn't go up and check on them themselves, as the stairway was already on fire. George and Jennie, their 2 oldest sons, Marion and baby Sylvia, were able to escape. But 5 of the children were still, presumably, stuck up in the attic as the house was engulfed in flames.
Efforts to rescue the remaining children were made painfully more complicated. Since the phone no longer worked, Marion ran to the neighbor's house to call the fire department. George attempted to climb the house and break a window. He and his 2 sons tried to use a ladder to save the 5, but it wasn't in its usual spot and they couldn't locate it. In a last-ditch effort, George tried to pull the trucks he had up to the house and climb through the window, but neither would start, despite working perfectly the day before. The Sodders had no choice but to wait and watch their house burn for the next 45 minutes. They assumed their children were dead. There was no way they could have escaped. The Fayetteville Fire Department, low on manpower due to the holiday, the war, and that individual firefighters needed to call each other, did not respond until that morning. Fire Chief F.J. Morris later said that the already slow response was further hampered by his inability to drive the fire truck, and he waited until someone who could drive it was available. Once the fire department was able to arrive at the scene hours later, they could do nothing but look through the ashes and remains that were left. Morris told the Sodders that they hadn't found any bones. According to another account, the fire department did claim to find a few bone fragments and internal organs, but for whatever reason, chose not to tell the family. Regardless, it was a poorly conducted search, and Chief Morris ultimately concluded that they had succumbed to the fire, and that it was hot enough to burn their bodies, bones and all.
Let's take a step back. There are a few things you need to know about George Sodder's background that can help put things into a little perspective. George and Jennie were both born in Italy and immigrated to the United States at relatively young ages. George Sodder was born Giorgio Soddu in Tula, Sardinia, Italy, in 1895. He came to Ellis Island when he was 13 with his older brother. However, his brother returned back to Italy as soon as they had cleared through customs. He went by an American version of his name, George Sodder, for the rest of his life, and wouldn't talk about why he left his homeland. Soon, George found work on railroads in Pennsylvania, and a few years later, he took work as a driver in West Virginia, soon starting his own trucking company. He and Jennie Cipriani married in 1922 and had their first of 10 children a year later. They settled in Fayetteville, West Virginia, where there was a large Italian immigrant community. George's business prospered, and the Sodders were very respected in their tight-knit community. However, George was not shy in sharing his strong opinions, especially regarding his disgust for Benito Mussolini and the fascist Italian government. This would lead to occasional heated arguments with others within the community. In the aftermath of the fire, Chief F.J. Morris told George to leave the site undisturbed so that the fire marshal could conduct a more thorough investigation. However, George and Jennie couldn't bear the sight of the remains anymore, so George bulldozed dirt over the site with the intention of creating a memorial garden. When the local coroner convened an inquest, it was determined that the fire was the result of faulty wiring. Death certificates were issued on December 30th, and a funeral was held on January 2nd. George and Jennie were understandably too grief-stricken to attend. The Sodders tried their best to rebuild their lives, but that was soon found to be impossible. There were things that just weren't adding up. If the fire was the result of an electrical problem or faulty wiring, why had their Christmas lights remained on during the fire's early stages instead of completely going out? Why didn't they hear the screams of their 5 children from the attic?
Remember the ladder George had looked for in an attempt to climb the attic window that he couldn't actually find? They found it at the bottom of an embankment 75 feet away. A telephone repairman later told the Sodders that their house phone line had not been burned through the fire, like they originally thought, but that it had been cut by someone. In order to cut that phone line, one would need a ladder. Now you may recall, Jennie was able to receive that strange phone call at 12:30 a.m. It's important to note that after later investigations, police were able to locate the woman who made this call, and she admitted that this was indeed a mistake of dialing the wrong number. Nonetheless, it's proof that if the phone line had been cut, it would have had to have been done very shortly after this call was made. There was also the question of why George's truck didn't start. It was possible that it had been tampered with, but it was also possible that either George or one of his older sons, in a haste to start the trucks, flooded the engines, rendering them ineffective. The most perplexing of all was why the children's bodies, or at least fragments of them, were never recovered. Many of their household appliances were found and still recognizable, as well as some fragments from the roof. In doing some digging, Jennie found a newspaper account of a similar house fire that killed a family of 7, but all of their skeletal remains had been found. Jennie burned some piles of animals to see if in a fire those would be completely consumed, and none of them ever were. She spoke with an employee of a crematorium who told her that human bones can last even after bodies are burned at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 hours, which was far longer than that fry lasted, and thus way hotter than their fire could ever have been. Based on this information, they should have been able to find something from their young children, if, at the time of the fire, they were in the attic.
George and Jennie began to piece together the unthinkable. Was the fire merely a red herring to cover up a kidnapping of their 5 missing children? There certainly were a number of things leading up to the fire that were suspicious. Evidence emerged that the fire wasn't electrical and was set deliberately. A bus driver had passed through and said that he saw people throwing balls of fire at the house. A few months later, once the snow had melted, Sylvia, the youngest, found a small, hard, dark green, rubber, ball-like object in the brush nearby. This made George remember his wife's account of a loud thump on the roof before the fire, and he thought that this object resembled a hand grenade or another incendiary device used in combat. There were some accounts of witnesses claiming to see the missing Sodder children. One woman who was watching the fire at the time claimed that she saw some of them peering out of a passing car as the house was burning. A waitress at a rest stop between Fayetteville and Charleston, South Carolina, said she served them breakfast the next morning and noticed a car with Florida license plates in the rest stop's parking lot. There was another strange occurrence that George recalled that happened in October, just 2 months before the fire. A traveling life insurance salesman, after being rejected by George, warned him that his house would go up in smoke and his children were going to be destroyed because of his dirty remarks about Mussolini. Additionally, the family recalled that a few weeks before Christmas, George's older sons had noticed a strange car parked along the main highway through the town, with the occupants watching the young Sodder children as they came home from school. The Sodders hired a private investigator named C.C. Tinsley to look into the case. He found out that the insurance salesman was on the jury during the inquest that ruled the fire an accident. Tinsley had also uncovered a rumor that despite Fire Chief F.J. Morris claiming no remains had been found in the ashes, that he actually had found a heart, which he had later packed into a metal box and then secretly buried. Morris had confessed this to a local minister, who confirmed this with George.
George and Tinsley confronted Morris, who then showed them where he had buried the metal box, and they dug it up. They brought it to a local funeral director who told them that this was not a human heart, but a beef liver that had never been exposed to fire. Rumors spread that Morris had admitted it didn't come from the fire, and that he placed it there hoping that the Sodders would find it and deem it then plausible that the children died in the fire. When confronted, Morris claimed that he wanted the Sodders to hear the rumors, dig up the box, and find the heart themselves, and consider the case finally closed. George was able to persuade Oscar Hunter, a pathologist from Washington, D.C., to supervise a new search through the dirt at their house site. Several small bone fragments were discovered, determined to have been human vertebrae by Marshall T. Newman, a specialist at the Smithsonian. Based on analysis conducted, the age of this person at the time of their death would have been about 16 or 17 years old, and given the age range of these bones, it was unlikely that they came from any of the Sodder children. Although Maurice was 14 at the time of the fire, and it could have been possible that the vertebrae of a boy his age could have been advanced enough to look a few years older. Newman also noted that the bones showed no sign of exposure to flame. He added that it was particularly strange that those were the only bones found, as a wood fire of such short duration should have left full skeletons of all the children behind. Newman concluded that the vertebrae found had most likely come from the dirt that George had used to bulldoze the site. Despite the lack of answers, the Sodders never gave up hope. They printed flyers of the children and offered $5,000 reward for information. In 1952, they put up a billboard with pictures of their children and a description of what happened at the site of their house, and another along U.S. Route 60.
Over time, the Sodders grew to believe that their children were kidnapped, possibly by the Sicilian Mafia, and that law enforcement was somehow involved in a cover-up. There was a theory that the Mafia wanted to extort money from George, and that maybe their children were taken by someone who knew about the plan to set the house ablaze in an effort to keep them safe. There were theories that the children were perhaps taken back to Italy. There had been a few potential sightings of the children over the years in the U.S., and the Sodders would follow up on these leads. A woman claimed that Martha was in a convent in St. Louis, Missouri. A bar patron in Texas claimed to overhear 2 other people saying that they knew what happened during a fire on Christmas Eve in West Virginia. A woman in Houston claimed that Louis revealed his identity to her one night after having too much to drink. The Sodders investigated every lead, but nothing ever came of any of them. One day in 1967, the Sodders received a letter that they believed was the most credible evidence that at least their son Louis was still alive. The letter was addressed to Jennie, postmarked in Central City, Kentucky, and had no return address. Inside was a picture of a man around the age of 30, with features that strongly resembled Louis Sodder, who would have been around this age if he did indeed survive. On the back of the photo, it read, "Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie, I little boys, A90132 or 35.
The family hired another private investigator to look into where this letter possibly came from, but he never reported back to the family, and they were never able to locate him again.
The Sodders admitted later that it felt like they were hitting a rock wall and couldn't go any further with finding out what happened to their children. But they vowed to never give up. George was quoted as saying, "We only want to know. If they did die in the fire, we want to be convinced. Otherwise, we want to know what happened to them."
George Sodder passed away in 1969 without ever finding out what really happened to his children. Jennie and her surviving children, with the exception of John, who never spoke about the fire and wished that his family would just move on, continue to seek the truth as to what really happened to Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, and Betty. For the rest of Jennie's life, she wore black in mourning. She passed away in 1989, and after her death, the family took down the billboard. The remaining Sodder children continued to publicize the case of their missing siblings until their deaths. The youngest, Sylvia, passed away in 2021 at the age of 79. Like I said, it's really sad. To me, this is such a it's like a little bit straightforward, and that to me the only option is that they were kidnapped. I think like all the evidence really speaks for itself that like they were nowhere near that fire.
Yeah, I think that they were kidnapped. I feel like there's just way too many circumstances that lead towards it being a kidnapping.
Right.
I think the strongest evidence that they died in the fire would be that nobody heard anyone in the house kidnapping them.
Yeah, but I think like, yeah, that's totally fair. I think that I get the feeling, I mean, obviously I don't know the layout of their house, but I get the feeling that it was like, nighttime on Christmas. The parents had they been out partying?
No. The parents were all at home. Like, it was just Christmas Eve.
It was just Christmas Eve, but were they like, I just think like, I'm wondering if they were just so asleep.
Jennie Sodder that night woke up like 3 times and went back to sleep every single time. So
you wonder why.
Woman must have been a great sleeper. The oldest daughter, Marion, she was sleeping on the living room sofa.
That's right.
And then the parents were, I believe, upstairs in the room. I think the other 2 brothers were also upstairs. And Jennie had only assumed that the kids had gone back up to the attic. Yeah. She didn't know that for sure.
Okay.
One thing that I think is an interesting piece in this case that I think gets very overlooked. So Jennie had come downstairs, noticed that the lights were still on, that the curtains weren't drawn yet. And then she assumed that her 5 kids had fallen asleep, and then just like did lock the door, close the curtains. But part of Maurice and Louis's chores that night were to feed the chickens and put the cows in.
Yeah.
I feel like it gets thought a lot that like someone took a ladder to go up to the attic, but how would they know that the kids were there? I think what maybe happened was that the kids were outside doing their chores. The 2 brothers, like that was to feed the chickens, that was their chore that night, and their sister just went with them. And then maybe they got kidnapped, and then the house got set on fire.
The point about like how would they know that the kids were in the attic like is a really good one. I do think though there has to the way the kidnapping, like if this was a kidnapping, the way it would have happened seems to have had a lot of forethought though. Like it didn't feel random. It's not like a random kidnapping, right? Like this is like if it was a kidnap, I feel like I keep having to say that as like a preface. If it was a kidnapping,
I don't think anyone's gonna come back to sue us. So
it's just
look out for our Scientology episode.
It's just it's I want to be sensitive, but at the same time, it just feels like this had to have been a kidnapping. That's just to me, it's like almost not a theory. That's very straightforward to me. But because of the whole political aspect of it, like it feels like he was kind of targeted.
Yeah. Definitely. From
and so like it would require planning. Why Christmas Eve? Why did they know to look in the attic?
The fact that it was Christmas Eve tells me 2 things if it were a planned attack. One, that it's just so personal.
Yeah.
Like my boyfriend's part of a big Italian family. Everyone's there Christmas Eve. And then also that like whoever did this would know that they would be home.
Right. Yeah. Right. That's true. That's one sure way to know when they're home.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm part of the camp that thinks, I just think that the story is meant to like, not that someone has like pre-written this story, but the ladder was moved and like, why else? I think like maybe what you're saying about the boys having gone out to feed the chickens and put away the cows, like it could have been maybe they got them there and then the rest of the kids were up in the attic already
like, no one was screaming.
Yeah.
No one heard anyone break in.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that, like, the whole thing about obviously the phone lines being cut, the cars not starting to, like, when I'm watching a movie and both of those things happen, you know that you've been fucked with.
Yeah. And the fact that the salesman had said, like, a couple months before, maybe, like, I think he had said in October that your house is going down, and you could chalk that up to a coincidence if that were the only thing that happened.
Right.
But that's just such a weird, specific thing to happen in such a short span of time. And also, if you remember, that salesman was a part of the coroner's jury that ruled that they died in the fire.
Yeah.
I want to kind of call out how bad this fire department was. Again, I get there were circumstances. It was a different time. It's also a very rural area. And, the war had just ended. So I get that they're low on resources. But you would think that, like, what the fire chief's excuse for not driving the fire truck to their burning house was that he wanted someone who could drive it.
Yeah, I just
very, very odd.
When you hear about this case, you're like, this was clearly so long ago.
Yeah,
like this is like we were talking about with, like, Circleville. It's like small town kind of behavior. Like, the excuses seem weirdly personal.
Yeah.
But it's also 1945. Yeah, low resources. It's post-war. It's everyone is tired and, like,
it's the holidays.
It's the holidays. First Christmas after the war is over. And every single piece of evidence that they found, like, against the kids dying in the fire was, like, the fire department was just like, they died in the fire. Okay, like, leave us alone. The beef liver thing, like, really gets to me. It's because, like, sooner or later, like, I get that it's 1945 and people might not know what a human heart looks like. But first of all, a human heart probably would have burned in a fire.
Yeah.
The bones are the thing. Like, how, like, they just kept, like, putting it off. It was like, maybe this will, like,
I feel like the sentiment was like, they'll get over it.
Right. Like, which is like, no, you can't get over 5 of your kids going missing.
Yeah. Either, like, dying a horrible death or having an equally horrible life.
Yeah.
I think I had to reread because I wasn't understanding why Morris would put the beef liver in the box.
Right.
And then not only that, but just not tell them.
Right.
Like, so bury this box on their property and then, like, as a grave, but not tell them. I think his hope was that people would hear rumors about it and then the family would see it, open it, be like, oh, this must have been one of their body parts, and then just move on. That logic
doesn't make any sense.
Zero, even for 1945.
I'm sorry, it's the 1945 of it all. What logic?
They'll move on.
Yeah, they all also were speaking with transatlantic accents. Okay.
Can we just give some kudos to Jennie? I mean, to George and Jennie, but specifically Jennie. Mm-hmm. I'm, like, amazed at, she's going to this crematorium asking, she's asking for at what temperature do bones would they burn? Like,
don't get between an Italian mom and her kids. That's the lesson here. Truly kudos to Jennie.
Jennie Sodder and George.
And George. Yeah, I know.
MVPs.
It's just that, she really, like, put herself out there as a mom.
Yeah. In a time where it could have very well have been easy for her to just mourn. It's
really touching that she didn't give up. Like, she didn't give up until she died.
Yeah. Neither one of them did. I think the memorial that they put up, they tended to that their whole lives. Yeah.
I can't imagine how she must have felt. I got chills hearing about it and seeing that photo, but I can't imagine what she would have felt seeing that picture of Louis.
I can't imagine when they first got that, what that must have felt like, because to this day, what gives me chills about this case, aside from the whole thing, obviously, but is that photo. Like, I look at that photo and I just feel so creeped out.
Yeah.
And I can't really put into words why, but I'm curious if you think that what is him.
I think so. I don't really know what the numbers of the message he left meant, or, like, I Little Boys.
So on the back of the photo, it reads, Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie. I Lil Boys, I think that's ILIL. Not sure what that means. And then A90132 or 35. Also not sure what that would mean. I first thought that was a zip code.
Or could it be a what's it called, license plate?
Maybe.
Had that thought too.
Yeah. Nexpo recently did a video about this case, and someone had commented that I love brother Frankie could be a reference to Jennie's brother. The mom, Jennie, had a brother named Frankie who lived in Florida. And if you recall, when one of the possible sightings of the Sodder children shortly after their disappearance was at a rest stop, and the car that they were in had Florida license plates. So there's a theory, thank you to whoever commented this on YouTube, by the way, there's a theory that maybe the brother had, Jennie's brother Frankie had some level of involvement with their kidnapping. That there was possibly a dispute over the house that they had, and like who was getting it and money. And...
Okay, well that's a whole different avenue from the whole like Mussolini thing.
Yeah, it's
maybe makes a little bit more sense
if it were like so personal. I feel like that would make more sense than, you know, the Mussolini comments, but at the same time, that comment is the first time that I heard of this.
Oh, I hear you're against I hear you're against fascism. I'm going to take 5 of your kids versus you're not going to give me my house. I'll take 5 of your kids. Like, I think the latter makes sense, right? That's an interesting
It makes
theory.
sense. I'm curious why like that hasn't picked up more, but at the same time,
I mean, maybe it probably didn't pick up more because Jennie probably was she in touch with her brother?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, we don't know. I'm
not sure.
Either way, I mean...
Oh, and also another one of her brothers was one of the firefighters.
No way. Why are there so many Italians in West Virginia?
For whatever reason, in this particular town, there's a really prevalent Italian-American neighborhood. Yeah, it was like Bensonhurst there.
Or any part of New York.
Not Flushing.
Yeah, that's where my people are. Either way, I think it's interesting. I mean, I think Jennie having a brother named Frankie does kind of make me think that that's definitely Louis, in the picture.
It looks like him, too.
It looks like him.
And it would be the same age.
It would be the same age.
Yeah, like that guy looks like he's around 30, and if this was... if they got it in 1967, then it would be around that age.
I also think, like, in the case of the Sodder children, like, I feel like people are mean sometimes when things like this hit the news, and like they'll like pretend that the kids are alive, or like, do prank, and I don't feel like that really happened with this case, and so it feels like that's really a unique sort of thing that they were sent, and that it's probably really him.
Yeah. I do think, I think part of it was a different time.
Yeah.
So this story probably reached a lot less people.
Right, just a small town.
Did, yeah. But there were leads in like New York, and I'm sure like most of them like were maybe people who were well intentioned but didn't, like, I don't know to what truth Martha was in a convent, you know what I mean? Or like at a ballet school. That is kind of a little warming to see that people actually wanted to help them find their kids. And I think that...
Southern hospitality.
Yeah. So is West Virginia the South? Would you consider?
Below the Mason-Dixie line.
That's true.
So.
I consider like South Jersey the South, though.
Well, then it's West Virginia is the South because it's more South than South Jersey.
And then like there was a woman in Houston who said that Louis revealed his identity to her. Again, I don't know how much.
It's weird. So Louis was the youngest one?
No. So the order was Maurice. He was 14. Yeah. Then Martha. Then Louis, who was 10, and then the 2 girls, Jennie and Betty. Betty was the youngest.
Betty was the youngest. That's right. It's just interesting that Louis got the most sort of like, he sent the picture, someone thought you saw him. It's like...
He was a handsome guy. There was a theory that some of the kids got sent to Italy. So
well, that was going to be my next thing, is that it was like, so if the theory happened, so if they were kidnapped, which I think they were, by who we don't know, but if they were kidnapped by these Mussolini sympathizers, why? And like what happened to them?
Maybe extortion. I don't know.
They never got any ransom letters, though. They never got any threats. So that's always the mysterious part of this, is that, like, usually a kidnapping leads to something like that, or like take back your remarks, like that kind of thing. Nothing like that happened.
Yeah, it's very odd. There was no concrete front that George Sodder or anybody else in the family had committed to warrant something like this, at least as far as we know. Yeah, if it were a kidnapping, it is like, well, okay, what's the reason behind it? Yep. Like, it's certainly not a case of one parent kidnapping, you know what I mean? And like, why would they go back to Italy? Yep. Or like, why would there be a rumor of them going back to Italy, and why would the mafia be involved? Like, what was George Sodder doing? I don't mean this to like say like, well, George Sodder's definitely doing something. I mean, like, if there were a reason behind it, I highly doubt that it was just him making anti-Mussolini remarks in the country that won the war. Yeah, but that's the thing, is that, like, I know, I don't want to get too political here. Yeah, on a scale from mild to spicy, how political do we want to get on this one? I don't like Mussolini. So no, but there is another politician I don't care for these days.
I was going to make a loose comparison to how fascist notions run deep, regardless of whether their leader is alive or not. All they need is a figurehead. And yeah, I mean, that's just because the war is done, it doesn't mean the belief system is gone.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Even if they're in America, like, it's not like and I think that was a big part of immigration, and is still a big part of immigration now. It's like, just because you come here doesn't mean you have like you're politically aligned with how America is running things.
Yeah, I guess I just mean,
for better or for worse.
Yeah, no, 100%. I guess I don't doubt that there were people who were unhappy with him. I guess I just find it hard to believe that he would just be so anti-Mussolini and making these charged remarks, and then they decide to burn his house down. You know what I mean? No. But, I mean, I guess it happens. Maybe I'm a good person and I just can't picture it. But
I just think it's a mystery for a reason. I just do think it's irresponsible, or it was irresponsible of them to just mark it off as the kids died in the fire, because you would smell it, you would see it. Yeah. You'd
smell their flesh. They didn't smell that at all.
Gross.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
I mean, no, that's what happens. Yeah, I know.
That is what happened. But I would, like, I hate to bring this part up, but you would hear that. You would assume you would hear them screaming.
Absolutely,
if they
you would hear them
dying in a fire.
Yeah.
Or that, like, one of them, because it wouldn't kill them right away. Like, you would assume that, like, they would try to get out.
Yeah. And so the fire, let's talk about the fire a little bit. So the fire,
yes, please,
starts in George Sodder's office.
Jennie receives a phone call that eventually wound up being like a legitimate wrong number. Yeah. Then she's woken up by the sound of an object hitting the roof, making a loud bang. Listened, didn't hear anything, went back to sleep. Then she woke up smelling smoke, and the room George used for his office was on fire around the telephone line and fuse box.
That's right.
So I guess it's possible it started on the roof and then she just noticed it in his office first.
Half an hour is, I think, like, fire catches quickly.
Yeah.
Especially, and so, like, when they were like, was it a grenade? Like, I feel like that was maybe something unrelated. I wasn't sure. I've had both thoughts, but, like, the more I think about it, the more I'm like, She smelled smoke. It sounded like it was a slow fire. I don't think a grenade is a slow fire. It sounds like they were trying to play it off like an electrical fire.
Which was bullshit because their lights were still on.
Yep.
And if it had been an electrical fire, that would have gone out.
They looked up and they said the stairs were already on fire, so they couldn't go up to check on them.
Yeah. The two oldest brothers came running down saying they didn't see them up there too. I've heard a couple different. I think maybe they had changed the story, not like suspiciously, just like they had said that in the chaos of the moment. And then the fact that the phone lines were cut.
Yeah, that's always so bad.
Jennie had received a phone. I think if anything, it was good that they received that wrong number, because it proved that at least at that point the phone was working, and that.
It was truly a wrong number, right? We don't suspect.
Yeah, they found the woman. I don't think it was foul play. I do think that they found the woman. So it sounds like that was truly just a wrong number.
Yeah.
I mean, like Christmas Eve, you're drinking. Like,
I'm not dialing anybody on Christmas Eve. I think this case is just always going to be unsettling. Like every case that we do here is going to feel a little unsettling, and it's not just because 5 kids died or disappeared. It's because we're not sure why. And that's kind of the worst part. And like we're saying, can't imagine what it's like to be Jennie.
Yeah. There's something particularly dark about this one.
Yeah.
Particularly heinous from who would want to hurt the family, from the fire department and the police department. One Uncle Bob's, by the way. Can we just say, get that out of the way? Yeah. One Uncle, 0 if I could.
They didn't do anything. They just wanted to put it under the rug. That's what it was, is that we have all the evidence to say otherwise, and they could have gone down the path of looking into who kidnapped these kids, but they didn't, because they just wanted it to be over with.
Yeah. And just flat out going against science by saying the bones would have burned.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's just something particularly really unsettling about this one. I think part of it has to do with the pictures.
Yeah, it's the pictures and seeing their actual faces. We always say, how we always not celebrate, but we always know the faces of the villains, but never the victims. And in this one, all you can picture are the pictures of the kids' faces, and they're characters in this, especially someone like Louis, for example, who people claimed to have saw that photo. And yeah, so creepy. You just wonder, okay, so if Louis made it to 30 years old, where were they?
It could have been a hoax. Could have been a hoax. But it could have been someone sending it on his behalf, or it could have been him. Mm-hmm. Then why couldn't he reach out to his parents?
Yeah.
It's so sad. Again, any missing person case is really sad. But just knowing that it's been so long, and that all the Sodder children are, the surviving ones have passed away. The youngest, the little baby Sylvia, she passed away in 2021.
Okay.
So they never got closure, but hopefully in the afterlife they got some form of it.
Sure. Yeah.
Can I tell you how I found this case, actually?
Yeah.
If anybody's interested in just learning more about just missing people, the Charley Project is a really good resource. Is in the United States, but just a list of so many missing persons cases from I think they go back to the early 1900s. So I was doing some perusing, and I was on the section prior to 1945, and I saw a list of names: Maurice Sodder, Martha Sodder, Louis Sodder,
something's up,
Jennie Sodder, Betty Sodder. I was like, what's going on here? So that's how I found it. But yeah, check out the Charley Project. Definitely a lot of great resources there. That's how I found out about it. And this case has been covered by a lot of great podcasts and YouTube channels. Nextboat, like we said, recently did an episode on it. BuzzFeed Unsolved, kind of a love-hate relationship with BuzzFeed Unsolved, but I think this was the first case of theirs that I had watched. Yeah.
Well, it's a short one, but it's a good one. It's good because it's so peculiar. And we've been talking about it for like 20 minutes and we have no idea what happened. I actually feel less certain about what happened.
Did you go into this thinking we cracked the Sodder? We're going to West Virginia?
I did not. I didn't. I had no plans to go to West Virginia. I did, however, feel pretty confident that they were mafia'd. Which, by the way, can you please tell us the fun fact about this last name, which doesn't sound Italian at all?
It's technically made up. So George Sodder had come to Ellis Island, and his name was Giorgio Soddu, which when we were going over our voiceover, I really struggled with saying that name.
George, you said.
I do not have an Italian tongue. I didn't mean that like in a perverted way.
She definitely did.
Again, have an Italian grandmother. I can say these things. Had she's dead, so had. Do I say had? Do I had? I had it.
She's still your grandmother.
Still, okay, so I have a dead Italian grandma. Anyway, they did what they did to Vito Corleone at Ellis Island and changed his name. But I get the impression that George Sodder liked being American. Like I get the impression he was okay with.
I think so.
That.
I feel like this is like the Sodder children case is like a little bit of a Italian American history, which should definitely be studied. It's pretty interesting.
There's more than just The Sopranos and The Godfather.
Yep.
And Goodfellas. All great media. That is Tony Soprano's head is cut off, but that's from The Sopranos in case anyone has picked up on that yet. Big fan of The Sopranos in this household. Pooja?
Thanks so much for watching. We hope that we've left you with something to think about. And as always, if you have any mysteries you'd like us to discuss, let us know.
Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.
See you next time.